Afternoon, everybody. Thanks ever so much for joining us again at, boy, how many episodes have we had now, Warp and Woof Radio? Over 200 episodes of different folks from around Indianapolis and, quite frankly, around the nation. We're really grateful to have these kinds of conversations that open up opportunities for us to actually be so honest and transparent with each other. And today we have a great opportunity to be with Charlie Mitchell. Charlie, student of mine from the past, but quite frankly, we're students together in all of this, and we're trying to navigate the shoals of how do we get through this cultural moment. Of course, we're really speaking about here the death of George Floyd and what has transpired because of that, and since that time, this past week, so much has happened. And Charlie, thanks ever so much for taking some time today to do this.
Man, it's my pleasure, Dr. Eckel, and you're an incredible thinker and an inspiration to me. And so, man, just to have the conversation is always a pleasure and an honor to do that.
I'm grateful, brother. So, jumping right into this, as you have navigated this, I mean, over the days, and you've quite frankly, you've been in the midst of it in ways that I could never be. Why don't you just kind of give us an overview of what's been happening? How do people on both sides of this particular issue, or even if it is an issue, how are we talking about this, and how are you talking about it?
Yeah, this has been a unique season where we were collectively kind of in this strange moment, starting back in March with the coronavirus and all of that, and being in our homes and locked down, and none of us have really been disrupted at that level. I don't think in our lifetime, in my lifetime for sure. And then just here last month, a few weeks ago, with the violent video and murder of Ahmaud Arbery. And that kind of brought some things to the surface, and we of course saw just kind of those reactions. It seems like soon after that, Breonna Taylor, we had that kind of come to the news, where this Black woman was in her home and she was killed by the police who were exercising a search warrant and went to the wrong place. And now, the video of George Floyd in Minneapolis, and, watching him, as the coroner's report is coming out and saying that he was asphyxiated from the knee of a police officer on his neck. And I haven't watched that video. I kind of made a resolve after Ahmaud Arbery that I didn't need to see that that kind of thing happen. I get it. I can read about it. I can whatever, but I don't have to hear those kinds of things. And so that has, I think, with us being all locked in our homes for about 2.5 months, we only had coronavirus was on the news, and we just saw numbers and statistics. And so now, with everything going on, and I think already the tension that we were feeling, this is just kind of blown up over the last week of riots all over, protests and riots and all kind of reactions to these series of events over the last couple of months. That I think, what I think is interesting is I've seen people that seem shocked by, and for me, it's not shocking at all, because I know for African Americans there is a low level kind of simmer and anger and frustration and disappointment that's rooted in grief and disappointment generationally, that all it takes is the right set of circumstances to set it off. And so me being a Baltimore resident, and moving here shortly after the Baltimore riots of 2015, after the Freddie Gray death in police custody, man, I've seen firsthand the kind of fallout that kind of comes from it. And so this is different than that. This is different than Trayvon Martin. This is different than the Freddie Gray uprising. This is a different moment, I feel like, because I think we were in a slower, locked in place that is forcing one another to really look at these things that are beneath the surface. And so we're just in the midst of, people on all sides, all political parties, all economic bases, all backgrounds kind of wrestling with where our country is in this historic moment.
You set this within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, and specifically the kinds of things that we're having to deal with because of that. And you hit the nail on the head, I think, when it comes to, we were kind of sequestered in our homes, and really didn't have any place to go. We're looking at screens constantly, all of that. And so the only real context we have is whatever the size of the screen is we have in front of us, and that's really just not good. So all we have is this constant barrage from the outside, and there's no face to face.
Right.
So talk for a minute about how important it is in terms of community, being with the church, being with community, walking down the street, talking with folk, tell us about how important that is.
Yeah, I think that's one of the main missing elements in this conversation, because right now all you have for a lot of us is our gut instinct and our already predisposition in our biases and our preferences. So if you don't have something else to kind of round that out, all it's going to do is raise all of these things to the surface. So all of these kinds of, and so it's been interesting talking to friends and colleagues and pastors and neighbors and family members, because you can see those echo chambers kind of get very loud right now. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have those voices, older folks, I'm talking to a lot of younger African-American folks about, man, I had to call my grandfather, my uncle, and ask him, have we moved any further down the line? Having to have conversations with white folks and say, man, do you have any Black folks in your church or neighbors or what that you can talk with and hear it? Like, man, if you don't have those kinds of conversations right now, you should have already had those conversations, sadly. But if you don't have those kind of things, like, you're only going to exacerbate everything that's kind of going on in the polarization and the tearing apart and the tribalism that's kind of happening on a larger scale. And I think, being alone in your house, I told my church weeks ago, when you're bored, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, that's not the best time to make a decision. And literally, that's the entire pandemic that we've been in. And now we're all hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and don't have the ways in which we would naturally comfort ourselves. We don't have those. And so it's like, oh, I got social media. And so I'm just going to pour my heart out, my feelings out to the entire world. And it's creating havoc and confusion and fear and just resistance to one another, when really we should be drawing closer to each other, saying, man, how can I really have these conversations and we can move the ball forward?
You mentioned having conversations with your church, with your family, with folks in the community. What has been the interaction between Black churches in Baltimore and the Baltimore police, and all of this wrapped up within that 5-year window we've had since the riots? Has there been movement there in that sense of things? Has there been a beneficial conversation? Talk a little about that.
Yeah, I think, we culturally, we all see that the church is in a very different place in this generation than it has been in generations past. And so institutionally, I would say by and large, we don't have the same cultural influence that we've had in the past. That's a double-edged sword, because in some regards, you don't see a lot of church leaders as the primary voices in these discussions and leading the charge, which means that you're going to get a lot of different kinds of voices, a lot of different agendas, and all those kinds of things. That's not coming from a Christian worldview. But at the same time, I will say it is given Christians the opportunity to be more subversive in their engagement. So I got a lot of friends and pastors and Christians that are on the front lines as police chaplains, and they're a part of organizations that are going out on the street and mediating conflict. And so while they're not getting the lights in the news coverage, they're doing the grassroots level work that really needs to take place. They're doing it on a person-to-person basis. And they're fighting those spiritual battles. They're laying hands on people to pray and care for folks. They're feeding people. They're loving on folks. So that's kind of the underground work that has to take place, whereas you don't see the kind of same high level influence that maybe we had in generations past. And so in that regard, man, one of my best friends, I call him my uncle here in the city. He's a spiritual father. He's a pastor of the city. He's the one who calls me and informs me, hey, this is what is happening on the ground. And here's how you could be praying as a churchman, as a leader in our city and in our community. And he serves both the police department and our local churches and organizations as a grassroots leader. And I go, man, I don't want him in front of the camera trying to find the right words to say. I need him to give me the real-time issues that are going on from the street and from, law enforcement, so that I can be more clear in how I'm supposed to lead my local church.
Your comments about the necessity of somebody to stand up and speak, and then your line about we don't have as much influence as we used to have. And by that, I'm assuming you meant the church, capital T, capital C.
Yeah. Yep.
So
yeah, I mean, I think that's just where we are. Like, this is a different cultural moment, and so a lot of people are looking, man, where's the church? Traditionally, the Black church has led the civil rights movement. We saw mostly Black churchmen that were leading the charge in that regard. But in this isn't the same era. And so, yeah, you don't have that same level of influence like we used to.
So what is it going to take to create what you and I have in the past talked about concerning a public theologian? What do you think it takes for the church to have that kind of voice again within the culture itself?
Man, that's a great question. The big thing I think we need right now is we've kind of got to go back to the drawing board, because immediately taking such political stances, and the political as in the kind of large kind of American political stance, because we kind of grab a hold to those kind of ideologies: Republican, Democrat, conservative, progressive, all of those things. Like, I think we've kind of got to step away from some of those kind of political kind of infrastructures and come back to a biblical infrastructure first. And so many of us view and read the scriptures from a Western-centric, kind of American triumphalistic paradigm, which is it's the air we breathe, it's the water we drink, it's everything around us. But as Christians, our allegiance isn't to the American government, it's to the kingdom of God. We have a dual citizenship, if you will, that Peter talks about. We're sojourners and exiles. And so while our feet is firmly planted in American soil in 2020, our heart and our mind, we put our mind on things above. And so we get our marching orders kind of from Jesus and from the scriptures and from that prophetic tradition. And so that puts us in a different category than any other politician, than any other craftsman, than any other thought leader. That gives us some frame of reference that is beyond just this immediate moment. And so I think that's where many of us have just, we need to kind of recalibrate and get a re-education in what it means to really be the people of God in an American 2020 culture. And how do we speak to it from there? And so but that's hard, because that means I'm going to have to go back into the my mental filing system and question some of those things that I've just naturally embraced.
Yeah.
And I've had to do that as an African American, whether it's in my instinct to just rage against the machine in moments like this, and kind of we've got caricatures of leaders from the past, of the Malcolm X's and the Martin Luther Kings and all of those things. So we don't really know who those men were. So it's like, because we don't know history, because we don't know those things, it's like, man, I want to be like Malcolm X. Why? Because he talked rough, but I've never thought about his ideas. I want to be like Martin Luther King. That old time religion stuff, that ain't gonna work. Nonviolence ain't gonna work. How do you know? You never read his work. You weren't there. And many of the laws that we operate under today are a result of their work. And so I think there needs to be a recalibration and a re-education and a discipleship that needs to take place that's biblically based. And that's even politicized now, because it's like, well, you talking about what kind of gospel you talking about and all that. But I think there needs to be kind of a re-education and then a re-engagement in the systems that are going on, so we can stand from a prophetic worldview. And I'll say it like this. One of the greatest examples is Daniel, where Daniel is this kind of person who is a believer in the God of Israel, but works in this very secular, very pagan environment, but is a voice of truth and life and hope to his people and to the evil regimes that he actually worked in and had influence in. And so I think we need to look at those kinds of models today, because they're needed now more than ever.
One of the things I struggle with consistently, maybe you might speak to this issue too, is what I refer to as social media time. And what I mean by that is when something jumps off, it's like everybody expects me to make a comment about something. Right. And, I didn't write what I wrote this morning until this morning. And, it's been some time. It takes somebody like me to go back and rethink everything and spend some time and, I don't just jump off on stuff like this. A lot of folks out there are a lot more brilliant and insightful, I'm sure. That could do that, but I just really can't. So talk about the necessity of the time need that you feel, that maybe, and I know I feel, to go back and think through things and then come up with a biblical response to these issues.
Yeah, it's hard because it's a lot of pressure. It's hard because it's just, you feel pressured to do something and respond in the moment. And we've deified and idolized speed in our culture. And so if you're not fast, then it means you're not active at all. And it's like, no, I just need time to I need time to calibrate, think, and then take strategic or wise action. But I just can't shoot from the hip on everything. Like I just in the things of weight and significance, I don't want to shoot from the hip. I do want to be more reasoned and rational. Man, did you just lose me? You hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I just don't see your picture anymore.
All right, let me switch this camera right here. I think I can do it.
One of the things that stands out to me in your comment about that, it is a story from my own life. I live across the street from an African-American neighbor who is a police officer. And his comment to me in the past, when we have had these kinds of conversations, is that he actually has said to me, hey, Mark, what is it that you have experienced when you see some kind of police-oriented connection to difficulties in the street and so on? And my response to him was, I really think it depends on culture and context. And he gave me a big bro hug in the middle of Kroger. We were having this big discussion in the middle of a supermarket. So here's this African-American police officer hugging me in the middle of the supermarket. and thanking me for acknowledging that it's culture and context that does indeed matter. So
Right.
when we speak to these kinds of issues, I think you've hit the nail on the head again with this issue of if you're not fast, you're not relevant. And, somehow people have this tendency to have that point of view.
Yeah, I mean, we live in the tweetable. Everything's got to be tweetable. Everything's got to be, if you don't respond now, you're not saying anything and all this. And I had to be reminded too, like, leaders in the past didn't live in the social media era,
That's right.
And when Dr. King talks about the silence of his friends, he's not talking about they didn't make a post on Facebook for me to see.
That's right.
And so he's talking about real, actual making a stand and speaking up critically. And so I think that's where, for us, time, history, and all of those things have a part to play in all of this. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of gray. I have a Southern heritage. That's how I grew up. And I've realized as a Southern African American, I react differently to these types of scenarios than my Northern African American friends. You can go back in history and see how Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois had different perspectives. Northerners looked down on Dr. King's tactics. And Southerners couldn't understand why Northerners would react the way they did. All of this is history. All of us have these contexts where I had people that were like, man, Charlie, but this, back years ago when we were having discussions about how to navigate the Confederate flag in religious services, and being a pastor down south, I had, people in our church that had Confederate flags on different things or whatever. And, I had people say, man, you saying I can't have my Confederate flag means that you're telling me I got to denounce my Southern heritage. And I said, brother, I'm just as Southern as you. I'm as Southern as pecan pie and magnolia tree. I said, but when we come into the house of worship, we're a different culture. It is not me raising my personal culture. This is an American church. This isn't Southern church. This ain't Black church. This is the kingdom of God. We're worshiping the King of glory in this space. And so we don't want those be the dividing lines of our church. And so culture, context, history, all of those things are happening in this moment. And many of us have not thought thoroughly about all of those things and how they personally affect us, because they do. And that's why I feel, my wife is white. And when I say white, she's not white skinned, but assimilated into Black culture. I mean, she's white, and that's just who she is, culturally white, from central Wisconsin, a town of 5,000 people. And I was her first Black friend. And you know what I mean? She married him. And so it took her a long time, even in relationship with me, even knowing my family, it took her a long time to be able to fully embrace and understand the arguments I was making and the tension I was feeling. And so I go, man, it's hard work when you don't realize you have a culture. So we're going, man, you're white, you're in your white supremacy and all this and that. And they're going, because you're the majority, I have a culture. I mean, I can't tell you, I'll be a rich man if I told you, Charlie, I'm white. I don't know. I don't have culture. My dad's from Germany and my grandma from Ireland. I just go St. Patrick's Day. And I'm going, brother, you only knew, how much culture you have. So they're going, man, but they didn't even realize they were swimming in water, swimming in history, swimming in biases. And not bad, not evil, not good. It's just who you are. Yeah. So I'm going, you got to be able to go back and look at those things, then come back to the conversation and let's have a discussion about it, because you're feeling personally attacked right now, where I'm just trying to tell you this is just blatant and apparent. And one of the things I have to tell my friends sometimes, my white friends, is like, man, I think about race every single day. There's not a day that I don't think about how my race is going to be looked upon in the world. And so, but my white friends have hardly, if ever, thought about it.
Mhm.
And so I come into these conversations with an advantage, just because of how I've had to look at the world. But they're coming at it going, man, I'm scared to death to even say something, because if I say the wrong thing, you're going to yell at me.
Mhm.
And I just want to say, man, don't worry about saying the wrong thing. Just kind of, if you're in solidarity with me, I know your love. I know love don't have an exact language. It don't have protocol. It's relationship, and it's the willingness to go through the hard stuff together. And we'll figure out the words on as we go together.
Since you mentioned relationship, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. Talk about how important that is to build relationships, and maybe not the how so much, but how to build them. But talk about real specific steps, perhaps, that we all can take with each other, and maybe the emphasis on the word "with."
Yeah. We've got to be very intentional, for the sake of our children, for the sake of our grandkids, for the sake of for our own development. We've got to be intentional about who we are surrounding ourselves with. You'll hear a lot of self-help people say, you are the product. You're economically the product of the 5 closest people to you. And so I'm like, all right, well, if that's the case, they'll say, change the people around you so you can change the outcomes of your life. And for us as believers, as thinkers, as people living in a very complex world, that means I have to be in relationship with people that don't look like me so I can become more well-rounded. And I think that starts with vulnerability, to be honest with you, Dr. E. It starts with vulnerability and saying, man, hey, can we get something to eat? Can we hang out? You know what I mean? I'd love to hear your story. Whatever the case may be, and broach those weird and awkward spaces. I can't tell you how grateful I am for those people that have broached those spaces with me and just said, Pastor Charlie, I don't got it all, but listen, I love your vibe. I appreciate your voice. And so can we have a conversation, man, at another time, or whatever the case may be? And a lot of our relationships have jumped off like that. And so I would say to folks, it ain't rocket science. Don't make people a project. That's just awkward and weird. Hey, old lady, I see you're old and I'm young. You know what I mean? No, just genuine, take interest in people, and be excited to step into some place, and be willing to go to places that you're uncomfortable with. I think that's one of those ones where it's like, man, I want to stay comfortable and get everything I need. You're not going to be able to do it. You're going to have to make yourself vulnerable if you're going to hear voices from other people and perspectives from other people. And maybe they'll give you a hearing, in response. So, yeah, I think those are some ways. Being vulnerable, going to places you're not willing to go with people, and having those conversations and being genuinely interested to learn and to know.
One of the things that stands out in my memory is last May when you came out. You said, hey, Doc, I need to spend some time with you. You flew out from Baltimore, and you spent 3 days with Robin and I just talking. We'd go out to eat, whatever, just talking. And, to me, that's true friendship right there.
Right. And if we had more of that, a lot of this stuff that we're dealing with right now wouldn't be an issue. But because we're not having those conversations, because you can go on your Facebook friends list and most of the people look the same, because we can go on our news sources and stay the same, you're not going to get the conversations that need to be had. So, man, that's our encouragement. Hey, let's build more genuine relationships, and then we'll see some actual change take place.
There you go. Charlie Mitchell from Epiphany Church, Baltimore, Maryland. Man, my mom wants to say hi and thank you ever so much for your mile-high smile. That's what.
Man, thank you so much. Oh, I appreciate that.
Yeah, my mom loves that smile, man. So everybody, we're past 200 episodes now, Warp and Woof Radio. Thanks ever so much for joining us. This will be archived, so you can catch up with us later. Thanks again for being here today. and check out what Charlie had to say here this afternoon. Until the next time, actually, tomorrow evening, when Curtis Dunlap and I talk about why white people should watch black film, that's going to be a great discussion, an important discussion. We'll see you then.